So I obviously have a lot of conversations with people about AI as a tool and whether or not it's got good controllability and all these things. And I think the most fundamental problem with most of those conversations is that there tends to be an assumption that these tools are built or should be built like traditional tools. And the issue with that is that traditionally when you build something, you build each element of that program's tool stack, and you have to refine and fix each of those as you go and until you have something that's functional and easy to use and all that kind of thing. These systems are pattern interpreters, and the bigger they get, the broader and more complex of patterns they can interpret. And so, yes, there are people now, either because it's the cheapest way to go or the most accessible way to go or the most understandable way to go, or maybe it's just a temporary holdover to keep people engaged. There are people building that explicit traditional stack of tools for AI, but most of those systems are definitely worse than, at least for now, still definitely worse than traditional tools. Like if I have to press an arrow to pan the camera right, and it's going to do that most of the time, but I don't have control of how fast it goes, or I do vaguely, that's clearly worse than the traditional systems we had. And by a significant margin, because obviously traditional systems of keyframes and animations and that kind of thing, you can go really deep with bones, and there's all kinds of infrastructure basically. The thing is as these systems get broader and more capable of doing more types of pattern interpretation, including process interpretation, you're going to get to a point where it suddenly starts getting pretty good, at least, at interpreting what you are wanting to do, as far as, basically make me a tool that does this. I want to save that tool, now I can use that in the future. So you don't have to hit a wall of, oh, I'm using a new piece of software, I have to learn this entire new software, or what each tool does, or what menu it's under, whatever. So that's going to be a huge gain. And then you'll be able to use things like, if you gesture at something and like point over there and do that, that's something that it will probably be able to interpret just because it's seen that enough in reality, people pointing at things and trying to gesture them over, that you can just scoot a thing over, So there will be this combination of real life interaction and direction through video of the real world and humans, and the capabilities that it's seen through screen recordings and whatever of how software works. So it'll be able to create middle grounds where you do, okay, copy, paste, I want to move that thing over there type stuff. And that will be a function of the scale and the the abilities of these systems to interpret those types of patterns start coming into focus. There is an interesting element with text where, if you point somewhere or draw a line or do any of these things that we're used to having very clear, okay, if I point here and the object goes the opposite direction, or I draw a line and it makes a different line, that's very frustrating. Whereas language is, we're used to saying something, and even someone that speaks our language going, misinterpreting it, or we can make that connection of like, oh, it doesn't quite speak our language, so it's messing up that way, right? So we have an excuse built in for language, whereas physical stuff may actually be more frustrating initially, because if it's not right on the money every time, you're gonna have that why is it going backwards when I pointed forward type thing. And those kinds of things are already frustrating just with, even with our ability to give it the benefit of the doubt because it misunderstood us. If I tell it to say, go forward by typing it out and it goes backwards, it's real annoying. We just have a little more, or some people have a little more ability to work with that. But all of these systems are going to get better. the control is going to come into focus and start being a really meaningful thing. How far away that is unclear. There are clear things that need to happen that the road is just not obvious on yet, like the long form memory that we see in language. How does that translate into conceptualizing physical objects or assets or tools or anything like that? That's all a little bit unclear at the moment. You obviously need assets that you can control deeply in order to tell stories and make games and do that kind of thing. But even, Sora being able to have a sign that stays in the background when it cuts between angles and stays persistent, when it's occluded by the head moving in front of it. All those things to me are indication that the memory of things within a scene will stabilize with scale on its own. Being able to memorize long term or be able to spatially remember things so you leave and come back. I've often thought about the noise solution of, if you have noise that's based on math and you move through that noise, and maybe have a couple different scales of it so that you have different interactions. Maybe you have a way for you to be able to leave and come back and it's the same mostly location that you left. That may not even be necessary, and I'm sure people far smarter than me have other directions to go with it. But I think the point is that you shouldn't assume that just because you aren't seeing an individual piece move forward in the way you want it to, as far as control, you shouldn't assume that means that control will not come. I think what you should assume is that until we see clear evidence these things can't interpret patterns past a certain point, it's probably pretty safe to assume the pattern interpretation will keep broadening.